Hey Collective, it's Al. I'm coming to you with a video that will be accompanying a post I'm releasing later this afternoon on LinkedIn surrounding an observation that I had stumbled upon relating to how most of the theoretical concepts are kind of more for the advanced students within the Great Earth Academy, all seeming to be dependent on a collective consciousness or the ability to form a unitive approach to a goal or an outcome that society as a whole would be venturing to resolve or to move towards. And how I thought it was kind of ironic that that would be playing out in a world that is so torn apart and divided at this time. And the whole post basically centered around the concept that we as human beings tend to individualize or compartmentalize different ideas and concepts and sometimes neglect the possibilities that they actually feed into each other. And the piece really centered around three particular concepts that I found of interest that to me kind of gives us an idea as to where we're going. And so I wanted to speak to it more eloquently, or more directly, I should say, with a video form that would be echoing it, but with a little bit more detail and a little bit more interesting points for you as the observer. But before I do that, I first wanted to say that I feel like I'm under the impression that I should be giving congratulations to some of the students within the Great Earth Academy, because I'm under the impression that some of you are going to be proceeding forward with the great school, and that you will be pivoting and having new tasks and opportunities randomly come your way or surprisingly come your way that are based on the fact that a lot of our work that has been done up until 2024 and even into this year has now been reviewed by the hierarchy, if you will. And so they are now moving the students that are accepted into the next classes. You will be moving forward quickly. But just be advised that if this applies to you, that you would already have a wherewithal, that you were looking towards a pivot, or you knew that you had submitted information or been working on something for a long time, and just know that they are acknowledging that they have reviewed it, and that you as spiritual beings will be somehow notified that you will be moving forward. And a big hint will be when suddenly opportunities that you never thought would come your way suddenly arrive at your doorstep. So just be advised that that's happening in the background. And in that, it kind of played into this whole concept, because one of the things that I was speaking to was one of the biggest paradoxes that we have as a species relies on this concept of the Fermi Paradox, where we keep wondering outwardly in all of the different podcasts and all the different news stations where all the aliens are and if they do actually exist, with full disclosure and stuff like that being kind of rumored around at this time, but it being heavily reliant on us seeing them as opposed to understanding that maybe we are being monitored and that we can't see them because of our third dimensional perspective, right? Because we tend to look for alien life or other advanced life forms to be reflective of what we look like or how we appear, neglecting the fact that there might be higher dimensions and so forth that science is then now working towards resolving. But one of the things about the Fermi Paradox that fascinates me is that it's heavily reliant on our ability to have a cohesive understanding as to why they may not be visible to us, or why they may not want to be visible to the human race at this time. And to begin that journey, I kind of went to the Kardashev Scale, which speaks to the three types of advanced civilizations, and how type 1 civilization is a civilization that has mastered its right relations with the natural resources of its planet and moves technologically and spiritually forward as one in that light, before moving on to a civilization in the type 2 setting that would be able to do that and harness the power within its own solar system, before finally the third civilization would be able to tap into the entire universal design and utilize all of what lay within for the betterment of that society and that civilization. But again, that one did something very interesting. It begins from the construct of the civilization having come to the same agreed upon outcome and all working towards it before any of that could play out, and how it kind of negated the fact that you would first have to put the initial steps into how you would get there. And so the written piece really explored the fact that it might lay in the question itself as to why these things are kind of interconnected, and why we as a species are now maybe moving in a different direction where we would be needing to be more unitive as opposed to divided, right? And so basically, conceptually speaking, those three types of civilizations would basically have mastered the environment around them. And the point that I had left off with the piece for the written form, which for those of you who are reading it through LinkedIn, you understand, but for those of you who are looking at YouTube, understand that there's a written part that leads into this. But basically, I ended with an open-ended question to those readers, which was, at the end of the day, Could it be that it just takes a handful of students within the academy or a handful of players, if you apply game theory to the concept, to start working together in a unitative standpoint where they have themselves mastered their own energies and their mind, body, and soul relation, and how they then interact with the world around them to serve as the foundation layers to then build upon something much greater for a society, beginning with like a group of like individuals that really appreciate each other and like each other, and in their interaction with each other, beginning to build a larger collective or a larger community, and then the community then advance into a much greater collective, and then forming collective consciousnesses that one day would expand upon and throughout society, and that they would all agree upon a way of operations and a way of life that establishes right relations with the world around them. And so what I really was trying to push with that particular written form was I got to all of the bigger concept stuff, but it all depended on a collective consciousness. And the point of the piece really was to end it with what would then be the foundation, the stones that we would have to lay in order to get ourselves even to that point. Because if you do believe in advanced races, then wouldn't that be the most likely of tests or initiations that you would have to pass as a race before you were ever allowed into a universal construct that is all built on unitive scale, meaning a singularity as it would be the last outcome. But you would basically have to work with the universe around you, and you would have to be reliable and not negatively affecting the universe or destroying things that shouldn't be destroyed, and having the respect and the worthiness within you to fall into alignment with those things. And because of a lot of the conversations that have been happening last week with one of the scientists over on Mind Bialik's show, talking about maybe they're waiting to domesticate us and kind of the knee-jerk reaction that some people had to that vernacular, which I found funny. I realized that at the end of the day, an advanced class of students would never allow students that were not at their level to become part of that family, because it would be super selective about the process. And one of the things that science really does, or the philosophy or theology, is it allows you as an advanced student, or me as a student within the Great Earth Academy, to explore concepts that actually may interconnect, with the Fermi Paradox being the resolution. Well, if they do exist, and we do believe that they do, most of society believes that there are at least angels, but an angel can also be an alien to a scientist. But the point is, we do believe we're being monitored, and we do understand that we, as an evolutionary model, our progress is being kind of given to us as we go, right? We get little morsels of new information, and from within the game construct itself, things begin to change, and it grows. So they seed civilization, and then we bear the fruits with how we articulate it and bring it into thought form, and then speak it out into the world. So in that concept, we ourselves as individuals may be acting in right alignment with this concept of how we get to the Kardashev Scale, where we would be a type 1 civilization, right? Because a human being who's a spiritualist, or someone who's a scientist, who has an understanding of ethics and morals, will approach the world much differently than someone who lacks those skill sets. And the way that they exhibit their behavior and how they interact with the world around them becomes something observational from the standpoint of someone looking in. And in right relations, you then begin to form partnerships or interests with other people, that like-minded people begin to form groupings, and those groupings begin to build upon that foundation, and they expand outwardly, taking their energetic signature, bonding it with other individuals, and then they begin to make the game changes needed to become interesting to the world around them. And so slowly and organically, from within the game construct itself, from within the game theory, those players become the instruments of change that the advanced races are looking to harness and to utilize, so as to bring higher conceptual consciousness to the world. And I found that very interesting, because one of the things that's very frustrating sometimes as a student within the academy is how compartmentalized we are, right? There's so much opposition between faith and science, and yet in the end, they're all trying to figure out how we fit into the universe and where we come from. And so technically they're paired, and they walk in tandem with each other. And the more that we keep separating ourselves, the harder it is for us to make headway into where we need to be. And so understanding that then allows us to begin to intermingle concepts and theories in a way that begins to depict a story, or at least a direction, of where we should be moving towards. And so at the end of the piece, what I really wanted to state to people is it just takes a handful of individuals to really change the system from within organically by establishing their own right relations with the world around them. And even in Eastern cultures, there's something called the chi, which is basically your life force, then being utilized in a way that somehow helps society be uplifted. And if that is indeed the goal, that in the Western culture, it would just be formed like a life force or meditation or whatnot. And how you've noticed, for many of you, that you can change the dynamics of a room just by walking into it when you're in a great mood. Or, if you're like me, when you're in a bad mood, realizing that the way that your energy, what you put out into the surroundings directly around you, can influence their day. And how that's kind of a training ground for individuals who then might fall into right alignment once they've mastered it, into understanding how beneficial it would then be to have communities built with the same understanding and a monitoring system where they themselves always are present in their day-to-day and how they affect other people. And that then becomes something very interesting to anyone who's auditing or observing it. And one of the reasons I started this by congratulating the students who are moving forward in the advanced classes of the Great Earth Academy is because one of the things that the dream stated very clearly was that many people are super critical of themselves. And what they wanted me to parlay was, you have to understand that a perfected being is in the eye of the beholder. Whatever department or God or whoever you believe in, if you fall into right alignment and are acting in right relations to whatever your department is, then you are seen as a being walking a specific path that is speaking outwardly for a greater construct. And as you move through the world, you begin to experience life in a different way. But to understand that we can be so critical of ourselves that we forget that humans have this innate ability where they look for a title or an outcome and they go, oh, that person is successful. But they don't look to the steps that were taken to get there. And for the students I'm speaking to that are moving forward, it is in the way you arrived at your answers and outcomes that was of most interest to them. The strongest points for many of you were in your faux pas, in the mistakes you made, in your wrong relations, because your journey back to right relation was fascinating to a great deal of higher perspectives. And if we are indeed in front of a panel of advanced beings, whatever they may be, spiritual and or alien, then understand that those of you who will be moving forward will be moving forward because of your own merit. And where you think you fucked up is what got you in. Meaning that some of the mistakes you made were so authentically you that you showed up as yourself to the Hall of Wisdom, or as I call it, the Hall of Mirrors. And when you're able to see yourself clearly, you can then be a vessel for information that can then be most earnestly accessible from other people or by other people. So understand that many of you who thought that you were flunking classes here in the Great Earth Academy actually moved forward because you didn't run away from your shadow. In fact, you integrated both your soul and your shadow. And many of you now have a shadow that actually serves you. And that's super important for the higher realms because it's about balancing, right? The Great Earth Academy is all about the physicality of not negating the shadow, but instead integrating in a way where it serves you and it does not control you. So for the students moving on, that will be of special importance to you. But for those of you who are graduating with degrees, which would be anybody watching this, at least your consciousness is expansive enough to understand where we're going with this. Sometimes when you get new information or you start to interweave the threads of truth, the golden thread of truth that goes throughout different concepts or theories, you begin to then articulate it in a way that helps other people understand something that may have been out of their reach at first, but that through the cohesion of your thought form and how you articulate it, is somehow reaching them in a way that is very beneficial to the expansion of humanity, right? Whereas a lot of the darker energies, the people that really are trying to divide us and conquer us and enslave us, they always do fear tactics. You bring hope and wisdom to the world. You're converting your life experience and knowledge base into something that then expands consciousness. And it serves a greater whole. So even though you feel like you're losing your individuality, it is your individual life force, your experience, and your skill sets that add to the greater pie in the sky, as they say. You are of service to something much greater than you because sometimes it's in all the mistakes you made that connect you to your group. It's not trauma bonding if you override it and if you heal it. Then you become your own superhero and you become a beacon of hope to other people. So when we were looking at this particular concept, the thing that struck me the most is that most of the greatest theoretical concepts are heavily reliant on groupthink. It's on an ability for groups of people to put their swords down and to meet at the table and explore conversations that are expansive for society in order to move them forward. Right? The Renaissance was great through the artistic flair of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, all of them. But they took thought form and created art with it that told a story. And now for us, many of us are using words, the power of word, to articulate thought form in a more compressed manner and are able to either writers or actors or spiritualists, whatever you're doing. But you're bringing your experience and your skill set to a table with other people that will one day form the foundation from which we will be able to resolve the Fermi Paradox and to reach type 1 civilization. They are not separate, they are interconnected with each other. And when we start having these conversations with each other, it's important for us to listen and to be there for the other person. Even if we disagree, at least it's expansive. It's not reductive. It doesn't tell you you can't think outside the box. In fact, all advances in society are leaps of faith. And you have to understand that sometimes you're the vessel that articulates the way that the leap of faith should come. So if society really wants to move forward, both philosophically, theologically, or scientifically, all of those paths are intertwining at this point. If they're going to move forward, sometimes it's in the questions we ask ourselves or the questions asked of society where the truth of direction that we should be aiming for resides. And so I just wanted to get on the video and just point out to those of you who understand what I'm saying that sometimes when we compartmentalize theories and thought forms, we keep them so separate from each other that we negate the fact that they might be interconnected. And if there are indeed advanced races that are observing us, or however we came to be, that we're being audited, which would be the only real reasonable explanation as to why we don't see them, is because they don't want to be seen, then they are observing us to see where we lie on the evolutionary ladder, and are we trustworthy to be integrated into whatever lays outside of our particular matrix, which some people call the brain, the membrane. We are a member of a brain, of a slice of the universe, and that we are the prominent life force there. But if we are to become interwoven to the others or introduced to other membranes or other universes or dimensions, then understand that we would first have to prove ourselves worthy of the knowledge that we bestow and the wisdom that we seek, and then have the ability to walk forward in a way that's quite powerful for other people to find it interesting. In fact, I've noticed with many of us right now that many of us are moving away from legacy media. And a lot of us are moving more into independent thought forms. A lot of us watch or listen to more podcasts than anything else at this point, because we've become so aware of the kind of hypocrisy and the coercion and all of the dark stuff that's happening in mainstream media. So we moved away to our own independent thought form and are now finding more interest in podcasts or in different conversations being had by people that we somehow relate to. Joe Rogan, Maya Bialik, obviously Lex Friedman. All of these individuals are not just talking about celebritydom, they're talking about high conceptual thought form. And Lex in particular has really good instincts for how to approach it. And he always picks very interesting people who are humble. Because there is something to be said about humility and how you convey information. But in the end, are we all working towards something? And if so, could it be bringing people together through intellect and through wisdom and knowledge? Is that the path forward to get us away from all of the hypocrisy, greed, and corruption, and instead showcase what it's like to think unitively, group thinking, collective consciousness, and the power of bringing so many individualized thought forms together to then harmonize the chaos that exists by exploring topics that are far outside of what we normally would stumble upon and speak to it in a way that other people find it interesting. Because if done in right alignment, it builds upon itself, and more people find your content interesting. And as that begins to expand outwards, you begin to attract other like-minded people who want to talk to you or to talk to each other about these particular concepts, because it's now growing within the collective consciousness. Game theory is now changing. It just took a couple of people doing their own thing, and suddenly more people began to be fascinated more by the high concept stuff than the everyday nitty-gritty corruption and greed and stuff like that. Like, there's only so much toxicity you can take, so much poison that you can ingest before you get sick. And so for those of us who really believe in survival and a higher vibrational way of being, our concept of thought form has changed. We find the idea of alien conversations interesting, whereas before we would have just felt ridiculous. Or we find the hypocrisies to be so boring that we don't even pay attention to that. It's like, it's not affecting my life directly, but what I will be there for society, but I'm going to find right relations so that I'm not in the mud rolling around. Instead, I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. And as you walk your path, you might initiate flares of hope in other people. And that leads to unity, which then would pave the way to the Fermi Paradox, to the Kardashev Scale, and to the proven game theory. Because remember, game theory says that no matter how corrupt the system can be, no matter how corrupt the game can be, it just takes a couple of players to start interacting with each other to then change the game from within itself. And it has no choice but to change because people get so bored of corruption, greed, and all that other stuff that it's not a game to them anymore. They get disenfranchised with it, and they're looking for solutions that then bring them into something new. So it just takes a few people to do that. So when it was all said and done, what I really wanted to state with this video is one of the great things about being human is our explorative nature and finding patterning and things that kind of interconnect. And though sometimes it could send us down the wrong path, there is something to be said about expanding consciousness within yourself and how that then affects other people. Because one of the great things about being an explorer within the human psyche, like if you're a psychologist, I love you. You are literally exploring the mind of a human being, and you're helping them come to terms with their shadow. That's an explorer. That's someone who's really invested in observing humanity, much in the way that the higher realms would. So you are indeed in right alignment with that ability. And then you look at a spiritualist. Well, a lot of what's going to lay the foundation for where we can prove in science the Fermi Paradox or resolve these things will be based on spiritual beings. Beings who have integrated their mind, body, and soul into alignment to such a degree that they're now actually working with the energies they have in positive ways to uplift other people. And that's a skill set unto itself. So I feel like a lot of the foundation will be laid by change makers who are willing to explore topics from different perspectives and different degrees in order to find a middle path where they can at least agree to disagree and it's not as conflictive. In fact, you'll find that when you really process philosophical, theological, or any type of scientific concept, it brings really intelligent beings towards each other where they lean into the conversation and go, I never really thought about that, or oh my God, I was thinking the exact same thing. And for those of you who are now graduating at a spiritual level, be aware that this may be an indication to you of what you might be interested in taking part of in whatever department or whatever your specialty is, and something that brings community to each other. Because one of the things I didn't get a chance to speak to in the piece was that you already see altruistic organizations existing, but they exist independently. In fact, it's a consistent thread within humanity that we compartmentalize, right? If you want to talk about global warming and such, which we can't even agree that it's true or not, but you go to Greenpeace, or you go to one of the, the natural places, or if you want to talk about children's services, all of them are separate though. And one of the things that we're starting to notice is how they can interconnect with each other to really affect change, not individualized, but as part of a whole. And one of the great mysteries, or one of the great things that I will look forward to doing or being part of, is seeing how we can build the bridges between each of these particular communities in a way that then serves humanity on a greater whole. And how it will then show that it's your skill set and your individuation that is the perfect add-on to whatever we're working on. Meaning, each of you have had a life experience that is unique to who you are. No two souls have the same journey, and you have your own lesson plan. But in right alignment, and when you've accomplished what you were meant to do, you begin to change the way you interact with the world around you, and your energy does serve other people. And as you begin to move through the collective, you begin to focus on groupings of people that are like-minded, but that may have differences from you. And you're starting to look for intellectual stimuli. And as you begin to look for that, other people then begin to notice the change in you. And if they're coming with you on the journey, they begin to share interests with you. But one of the things that happens is we become so individualized that we feel our ego tells us, I should say, that we should be afraid of conformity. And of course that's true. But it is your individuation. It's those things that you have mastered, those lessons you have learned that add to the puzzle. So even though you are now part of a team, it is your life experience that is your individuation. It's just integrated into your soul. So you no longer have to carry that like a badge. Like, I'm not just this. I'm a multitude of life experiences, and now I'm fitting into a greater collective that is working on something that I want to be a part of. And then when you get to that location, then you start to see other organizations that are working on other humanitarian things, and then you want to build bridges between those. And you start to see the foundation and the structure from which we can become a type 1 civilization, or where we can finally resolve the Fermi Paradox, because they all rely on a collective consciousness. Groupings of people brought together into a cohesive aim or goal for society that does not hurt anyone else in it, and is not a power grab, but a naturally occurring evolutionary place from which society then moves into right alignment, right? Because if you think about some of the nuclear stuff and things that we were studying and so forth, it's very easy to use knowledge that we stumble upon in wrong alignment and atomic bombs and all this other stuff to really destroy the civilization, and so then fail the test and set ourselves back. So then it takes another 20, 30, 40 years for whatever you believe in to give us the next clue, and then they see and study how we take that knowledge and wisdom and what we do with it. And that becomes interesting. So in the end, what I'm saying is, if you ever truly want to explore the possibility of resolving the Fermi Paradox as to where all the advanced races are, you would first have to become one before they would ever allow you into their fraternity or sorority. It's something so particular that not most civilizations probably don't pass these tests. They can't. They're too divided. You know, they're too egoist. They're too money hungry. They're too this and that. They'll destroy their planet. They'll destroy each other. They'll do all that. But not everyone within those races fails those tests. So the question then becomes, what if you are granted freedom and spared the karma of the rest because you are in right relations? Or what if you are intrinsic to the change within the matrix and the game theory specialist that will begin to change to be the change maker that will completely turn everything around? You'll never know until you truly understand yourself and how you master your own energies. Do you stay centered? How do you deal with conflict? Do you understand where your shadow is? All of these things then become a beacon to other people who are in search of doing the same thing. And as you guys begin to coalesce and to become a cohesive unit, you begin to make the pillars from which a foundation can be laid. And then those foundations or organizations begin to build bridges with each other, restabilizing the world around them. And as they do, society, tired of all the corruption, all of the hypocrisy, all of the greed, sees the value in what you're doing, and suddenly you completely change the outcome for all of a species. And it just takes a handful of people to do it. So what I want to leave you all with is very, very, very simple. In the end, one of the things that I've noticed is, like I said, everything is built on a collective consciousness. It all resides from a standpoint that we can bring ourselves together with enough people to make the change happen from within the game theory itself, meaning from within the matrix or whatnot. It's an organic part of our own journey and what we're willing to explore. And as we explore things, the more we interact with each other outwardly, where the world can see it, the more interesting you become, and the more the game itself begins to change under your feet. Because you are now literally representing the salvation to something that seems out of our reach, which is, if you're a unitive thinker and you understand group thinking, you understand how successful organizations work, where they are a mass of the same like-minded people working towards one outcome, then you can understand from an altruistic reason or from an altruistic purpose that the same can be said for those. But one of the missing pieces is that we keep everything independent of each other. There's not a lot of bridge building right now. And for those of you who are looking for something to do in the world now that things are changing with AI and so forth, then how about finding a way to bring the world towards each other when everyone else is trying to tear it apart? Remember, this part of the journey is called trial by fire. It's called the burning ground. A lot of things will be broken down in order to restabilize or build something new. So why not be the rebuilder by already starting the process? Understand that sometimes by connecting threads between theories or thought forms, that you're actually doing something that moves the species forward. And when you speak to it where other people can see it, you might just be surprised at how much you change things and how important you are to the great game of life. And I'm going to leave you guys there. Bye.